So, here I am to discuss the limited Netflix series Adolescence, which, to be quite honest with you, I'm a little bit annoyed at even the title itself because I don't actually think that the show really even kind of highlights the concept of being an adolescent at all, now that I really think about it, but I digress. So, to be honest with you, I actually find this show to be extremely annoying, which is a take most people may have, but for different reasons. It's certainly a take that I don't think the ladies are having. The feminists seem to have rather enjoyed this. And I can understand exactly why they would enjoy it. I could understand exactly why they would enjoy a show that highlights a young man committing violence against women, which is peculiar because most men actually commit violence against other men far more than they do women, but whatever. So I'm going to be splitting this video up into roughly two sections. The first one kind of going over the general plot and why the cinematography greatly annoyed the hell out of me. And then the other half kind of discussing the implications of these different Manospherian ideas and how they were not really used to their fullest. I'll preface by saying that I actually find zero umbrage with the idea of creating a show about boys hating girls at all, which was the intent. I remember I was watching another video of someone kind of reviewing it, and he was reading an article, and I'm going to include it right here, so I didn't just...
As I quote, "It started with my friend, Stephen Graham. Stephen called me up and said we should write a show about boys hating girls, and about knife crime, which in the UK is really problematic now." End quote.
So, if this was the intent or the spirit behind Adolescence, we already know that it was created as a foregone conclusion to show the world, I guess, the violent nature or the violent tendencies of young men and how we can become so very dangerous to the young ladies around us. Again, the truth of the matter is, I actually don't think there's anything wrong with that. Not insofar as that it is a true reflection of how men are raised in society. That would be stupid. But if you wanted to show how a young man could become an individual that does indeed hate women, there's no problem there. In fact, I think that it would be quite the worthy endeavor. I just find it annoying of how they decided to go about it. That's how, well, we'll cover that in the second section of the video, really. So this first section here, we're going to talk about the plot, which is actually, considering that this is 4 hours long, pretty lacking. That's part of what makes me annoyed. And then kind of from there, from the plot and my different opinions on that, we'll get into the more Manospherian analysis. So let's start with the plot. So there are 4 episodes, and the 4 episodes are broken up with episode 1. We have the police, they find Jamie, that's our main perpetrator's name. They find his house, they send the SWAT team in, bust it down. They arrest Jamie, they read him his rights, and then we kind of go through the police holding procedural where we end the episode on the actual interview between Jamie and the detectives, where we then get the CCTV footage of Jamie attacking this young lady named Katie. Comes to find out, Jamie killed Katie. Let's just cut it off there because there's an hour of a whole bunch of stuff we just don't need before we get to what is honestly, at least to me, the only interesting and impactful part of that entire episode. That is, Jamie did indeed follow and attack Katie after some conversation or altercation the two of them had. So now we have some strong evidence that would point to Jamie did indeed kill Katie with, as we learn, a knife as he stabbed her 7 times. Spoilers, by the way. Sorry, too bad, so sad. I'm a little late on that one. The show, I find this oh so very annoying. The show pretends that we don't have the knowledge or that it is not foregone that Jamie murdered Katie. That's what the show is casting aspersions to this. Jamie doesn't admit to the fact that he killed her. He actually technically only somewhat admit to it. And doesn't fully accept that he's done it, or at least the implication that he did it, is at the very end in episode 4, he says that he is going to plead guilty. So one thing that I find so annoying is that Jamie professes his innocence throughout most of the show until the very end. And so it makes me as an audience member kind of confused insofar as if the detectives have a foregone conclusion that they believe Jamie already did it, and we're just looking for evidence to commit Jamie, or at least to, incarcerate Jamie, and then this ultimate court case that will occur, why are they playing so loose with all the details? Why doesn't the show just show me the details of what occurred? And even just including the murder itself. And, unfortunately, and I'll loop back around to this point later, it kind of feels to me that the show exists kind of as if we're looking at a violent young man through a window glass at a zoo, right? We're not really understanding him, but we're studying him. Which is stupid, because in a fictional media, you have complete control over it. If you want to explore the actual mindscape of this young man, you can just do it in a fictional media. There's nothing stopping you there. You have complete control of the environment and the story and the plot of what happens. It just seems like the people who wrote this, you can kind of see how ignorant they are on the concepts that they invoke, because they don't really go into the full depth of detail of what honestly makes perfect sense to do. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I'm just kind of explaining that the show, again, hour long of, there's even a strip search of Jamie, which again, I say there's superb acting here. The camera focuses on the father's face during that one scene in particular. That just really shows how disturbed he is. It's excellent. It's great acting. Didn't need the scene at all. Didn't need it. Totally irrelevant. Totally superfluous. Could have gone our entire lives without ever seeing that scene, and we wouldn't be worse or better off. It's so unnecessary. You can't even say it's even bad. It's not, whatever. Point is, a lot of information about Jamie's rights, about getting an appropriate adult, about even Jamie being afraid of needles and all of that, all these different details. Extremely annoying. Because the only important part of episode 1 is at the end when we get the CCTV footage of Jamie pounding Katie. And by pounding, I mean punching her, not the other thing, okay? You're right? Episode 2 follows the 2 detectives who were originally on the case trying to incarcerate or incriminate Jamie to begin with. I'm going to be honest with you, and this is another reason why I find myself so annoyed. I thought part of the show was going to be a wee bit of a commentary on how the police force, or how sometimes law enforcement or detectives, try to make a case rather than try to figure out the truth. That is not the case because, as I said before, foregone conclusion, Jamie killed Katie. It's foregone. The entire time he did it, Jamie was just lying the entire friggin' time, which is extremely annoying to me that he would even lie to his lawyers or lie to people that were supposed to help him, because as it turns out, lawyers, like defense attorneys, nigga. They could get you off of murder, nigga. You know what I'm saying? But he's 13. He doesn't know. He's 13. Shut up. Point is, this show casts aspersions. It makes what is true or what is obvious confusing only because it withholds information and then bleeds it out slowly for us to try to get something of a picture of what goes on. Which again would have been fine if this is a police procedural and we're trying to, as the audience, also figure out what happened. Well, we already know what happened, so it's basically like, why did he kill her? Which even then is like fine to figure out, like, well, why did he kill her? The show decides that it's not really even going to give us the full details or the full understanding of that, which I find, again, to be greatly annoying. Because in episode 2, basically the only important plot details are, we see the school environment that Jamie was in, rowdy kids and teachers that are not really invested in their students. The implication, of course, being that Jamie was not actually being invested in by his teachers around him. Jamie is not actually being invested in by his father, which we learn a smidge in episode 3, but we'll get there in a moment. we find that Jamie, while he may have had friends, was still being bullied and picked on. We learn that Katie was said bully of Jamie. We also learn in this episode, in episode 2, is where the little trailer stinger thing of the Manosphere appears. And it's actually the only time it's ever mentioned in the entire show. And it is the detective's son explaining to his father these Manosphere call to actions or concepts, which, to be honest with you, there are no true Manosphere call to actions. There's just, if there is a call to action from the Manosphere, it would be inaction coming from MGTOW telling you to leave these hoes alone. But we'll get there. Well, the only other call to action for the Manosphere would be to exercise, obtain social status, and accrue more resources. Nothing to do with attacking women, but we'll get there. So episode 2, we find that it was Jamie's friend that had the knife, which is the murder weapon, that he gave to Jamie. I'm not sure, he didn't give it to Jamie, so he could slay Katie. It just so happened to seem to be the case. And so those are the only real important details in episode 2. Which leads me to my absolute great annoyance in the way these episodes are shot. Episode 3 is my absolute favorite episode, and it's the only episode that I think the one take thing that they do is absolutely superb. It's great because of how intimate and focused the episode is on these two characters, Jamie and the psychologist, I think, who was supposed to find an understanding of Jamie that she could write to the judge as to how she understands how he could have become a murderer to begin with. Episode 3 is actually my favorite episode, and it's a great episode, and it belongs in a longer series where we actually explore these relationships between Jamie and Katie and not hear about them from the back end. That is, hear about the bits and pieces of what happened between them, and we, the audience, should have just been privy to what happened to them. But we'll get there. Episode 2, again, episode 1 and 2, they have this one-shot thing, which I think lots of people love it, and they praise it, and they're like, oh, great, cinematography. I think it's stupid. Why? It makes, which is ironic, it actually makes each episode feel more disjointed than if they would have just had cuts of actual important information. Like, if they actually were just cutting, which is ironic that, like, cutting different scenes together feels more organic and natural than having the camera literally follow a one-off character, walk to the next room so the camera could catch the two actual important characters. I find it annoying. It's really distracting. It breaks the action apart. I want more information. And I was getting ready to call it a film again. The TV show spent so much time on basic conversations that do nothing to give us any more new information. Literally, it was just, to me, there's just so much wasted time that could have been cut and just dropped to the editing floor. This could have been, honestly, dead ass, 2-hour, maybe 30-minute film. Of all the important stuff, legitimately, probably just 2 hours. Dead ass. Didn't need all of the information and conversations we had. We get to episode 3, where we learn that Jamie has violent tendencies. He's an angry young man. We learn that he was bullied. We learn from his point of view a little bit more how Katie was bullying him, and we finally get a little bit of an understanding of their relationship, which I think is a gigantic mistake, but we'll get to it. Which is to say that Katie actually fancied another boy. I forget his name. I'm just going to call him Fabio because I forget his name. Katie fancied Fabio, and as we learned, Katie was a little slut. Katie took some nudies of herself, sent them to Fabio, and then Fabio decided that he was going to show everyone his contraband. Probably shouldn't discuss it like that. But from that point, Jamie, we learn, in a backhanded sense, was attracted to Katie. At the very least, he had a predator's instinct. We'll get to it in a moment. Where believing that Katie was spiritually weakened by the fact that everyone around her was now calling her a little slut and has seen her in her naked state, Jamie decides that this was the best opportunity to try to court Katie to go to the fair with him. Katie, of course, rejects him with a... Katie just stabs him right in his heart, bro. Just fatalities him. She says, "Give me your heart, boy." And Jamie was like, "Katie, wait. Katie, don't do this." And Katie was like, "No, you are but a fool to believe that you would ever be worthy of me." And Jamie said, So an actual rendition of what occurred was Jamie tried to court Katie. Katie was like, "Ugh, no, never. I'm not that desperate." Those are what Jamie remembers. As Katie said, "I'm not that desperate." Obvious implications we will revisit again in a moment. Don't worry, I'm going to revisit all this stuff, okay? Just giving you the plot. And so Katie rejects Jamie and then proceeds to bully him with different Manosphere-esque terms and terminologies, which is actually peculiar in that it's Katie who understands these concepts or is using these concepts as a weapon to bully Jamie, than Jamie having his own research and true understanding of it. Interesting detail I picked up on that, but whatever. From that point, we get to episode 4, and episode 4 is a horrendous waste of my time. I absolutely hated every part of episode 4. Episode 4 focuses on the dad's guilt, on the dad's rage and frustration at what has occurred to his son, and then we learn that Jamie decides he's going to plead guilty to what occurred. And again, I hate episode 4 with an absolute passion. Never needed to be set to film. Didn't need it. Didn't care. I can't. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I hate episode 4. Total waste of my time. So with that out of the way, my final thoughts. Again, Adolescence. I hate that it's called Adolescence because the title implies that this is like a general, or that this is a expose, a highlighting, because highlighting is probably not a word, of that transitionary period between child to adult. That is what adolescence is as a concept. That's what teenagers are as a concept, a transitionary period where one begins to rapidly develop into an adult that has responsibilities. Originally, in the old days, children didn't have that. Children just went to work. Sometimes they just went to war. And so adolescence, ironically, is a relatively new concept that obviously people in my age bracket has experienced, but the show is not actually really highlighting that transitionary period, so I find that to be rather annoying. The plot itself, again, is actually quite lacking. You can honestly just take a couple of different scenes and then maybe smash episode 3 in between that, and then you have honestly what is the legitimate plot of the show. So it's like 4 hours of just nothing. Very annoying. High praise for a show that honestly I feel doesn't really deserve it, because as an actual piece of cinema, I am extremely annoyed by it. But people are entitled to their opinions. I don't really think it should be praised as a film media at all as much as it was, except maybe the acting. The acting is great. They're all very great actors, but that's about it. Cinematography was annoying as hell. So that's how I feel about it as a show. How do I feel about it as an individual that has made numerous videos in this so-called manosphere I find myself in? Distasteful. And, to be quite honest with you, quite the wasted opportunity. So there's this one lady. I think she's, I'm going to call her Weeping Willow, because almost every TikTok video I've ever seen of her, shit, this bitch even made it into goddamn Love is Blind. But this Weeping Willow, you'll see why I call her Weeping Willow, really believes in this project. This project did a great job of kind of showing us how the boys aren't okay.
We need to talk about the show Adolescence that is trending on the internet right now, and more specifically men's response to this, because honestly, I am tired, and I think we're all tired. But the fact that an entire show was made beautifully, I think every single person on this planet should watch it, highlighting the problems in society that lead to a lot of the neglect and the children we're seeing, and specifically centering it on young men and young men's related issues, especially surrounding their mental health. And especially the way they managed to do it, and the way that this kid was still dangerous. He had still done really bad things, but you still found yourself empathizing with him at moments and feeling bad for him. Right? This show truly had you understanding the problems that lead these boys down the red pill pipeline, and it really has you feeling the way that they feel as it's happening.
And I can understand that interpretation from a feminist. I can understand how a young lady who's never thought about these concepts and doesn't really think about young men and their disdain and perhaps even rage towards the female could ever come to fruition. Especially if most of the time they've only ever dealt with men that just were really fond of them and they only really see hatred of women on the internet. They don't really understand from our point of view, and most of the time they don't really care to try to understand how a young man could become an individual who could hurt a woman. Now, what annoys me greatly is that there are plenty of young men that get to a point that could hurt women. Lots of them are abusive thugs in abusive relationships, but we don't have movies on how that occurs as trying to understand those thugs and or high value males who are abusive. We always cast aspersion to the outcast, the one who is not attractive, which is an important detail in the actual TV series, that Jamie does feel like he's ugly and not attractive, and he does feel like a social outcast. Again, there's always this highlighting of that type of male becoming violent towards women, when in all actuality, the men that actually have the most ability to harm women are oftentimes powerful men, and it's just kind of peculiar that it's not oftentimes, it's only highlighted as when that's a problem, when it's political and it's a political enemy. But whatever, we'll discuss that another time. One of the biggest problems is there's so many different concepts to be discussed that the concepts they chose to use don't actually fit into the plot very well. So the concepts of the Manosphere that they bring up is the 80-20 rule. They bring up incels, and they bring up the red pill, right? So it's all just very brief little snippets. The 80-20 rule kind of feels like a buzzword, really, in this show. Nothing that really happened in the plot really kind of points to why these kids would care or even think about the concept. And even then, like when I coined the term very many years ago, and I know most people would never attribute me, but I was actually one of the very first people. Like, I discovered this concept all by myself, actually. And when I coined the term 80-20 rule, what I was really pointing to was that there's just a proclivity of ladies to funnel towards one particular guy, or like a small amount of men. I never meant for it to be taken literally. And even now, I don't know. I think it's far more literal with Zoomers now, rather unfortunately, but we can kind of discuss that some other time. But the concept was mentioned. We had, again, the red pill, just understanding the truth of the world that you're living in, and saying that Jamie is one of those red pill guys who are angry at women or whatever, or a loser. And then we get to incel, which is really just the modern day term for loser, which incel to a 13-year-old is actually quite interesting as a concept, insofar as most 13-year-olds realistically don't have the opportunity to have sex unless they're a young lady. Which says a lot. I don't know why we don't have very many films on the adolescence of young ladies being pressured sexually at the time they're literally 13. We should kind of focus on that from time to time, but whatever. Different video for another time. We're talking about the Manosphere today. So, this is my issue. If you want to tell the story of how a young man could get to a point where he would want to kill a young lady, you can't do it with this one. One of my biggest annoyances with the plot of Adolescence, the thing I hate the absolute most about it, is that at the end of it all, I still don't really understand why Jamie killed Katie. despite all the bullying doesn't really seem like it was that bad, even from Katie. I can't really say it was the bullying that got Jamie to kill her. There is a particular element that if it was actually highlighted and focused on, I could then accept it, and I'll get to it. But as far as what was shown, I just find it just doesn't seem to me that Jamie would ever feel a proclivity to kill Katie, even through all of his rage and frustration of being bullied and ostracized, by other kids and called ugly by other kids. Again, there is one particular element that I'll get to that is not highlighted in the actual show, but I'm going to expand it and I'm going to go into more detail about it because I think that element is really what could honestly make or break Jamie. But we'll get to it. I know I keep saying we'll get to it, but we really will get to it. And so what annoys me a lot is that the showrunners or the writers want to sprinkle these concepts in, but they don't actually want to use what these concepts in practice would reflect that could possibly get a young man very frustrated and angry at young women. And so if I were to edit Adolescence, number one, here's what I would do. I would, for one, not do the one take thing. That was so stupid. It would be cuts. It would be edited. We probably would have maybe 6 or 8 episodes. And one of the most important things we'd have about to the show is not just the mystery of whether or not Jamie killed Katie. We could even start at the very beginning of the show with Jamie killing Katie. So we know it's no shocker. But the why, how we get there, is what to the show would truly be exploring. And that's what the show wants to explore, but really can't and really doesn't. Because again, it's looking at these concepts from the outside in. It's not actually trying to understand young men and their rage and frustration, but trying to view a zoo animal and try to determine its behavior from that in its isolated cage, right? Not even in the wild, really. And so, number one, I would actually just have Katie and Jamie have a relationship. Like, it wouldn't be Jamie tries to court Katie one time. That's stupid. Or if you play that concept out, you would have to show a long stretch of little defeats, of a grinding of his soul. And even then at 13, it's like, I honestly think you should probably age this up to about 16, 17. That is when, the stakes of relationships are a little bit deeper. At 12 and 13, not really, you know what I'm saying? You get called a dweeb and get made fun of and whatnot, but, with a good friend group, you can kind of walk that off. But I guess with social media, it's different. I don't know. We didn't have Instagram when I was 12 and 13, so. But the point is, it's like, I just feel like the stakes are too low as a 13-year-old. But at 16, 17, that moment you're turning into an adult, the moment these relationships really matter, the moment having a woman in your life verifies your identity as a male, I could see then we have the ingredients of this tale of evil and darkness, because that's what they want to show us. They want to if they want to show us an honest portrayal of how a man could come, or how a young man could come to hate a woman. You have to play it straight. And you have to play it straight, and you have to play it honestly. And they were kind of getting there with Katie. Katie was kind of an asshole. Katie was not a perfect victim. Katie kind of sucked. And I feel like you can just lean more into those elements, or you have to show us that Katie was the straw that broke the camel's back. You have to show me more than just a couple of Jamie was being bullied. I need to see what was happening to Jamie and his friends and what happened in this relationship that could lead us to this. The reason why is because if Jamie as a character, or person rather, is a violent person, and that there are other behavioral issues that leads him to violence, that is not the corruption of the different Manosphere ideas and not a corruption of society, then what you really have is someone with a different antisocial personality. You have a problem that is Jamie's and Jamie's alone, and as such, as an allegory, is superfluous, doesn't work. Lots of people are really stupid and think that you can take people that have particular mental issues and span them out as a general reflection of society. That's asinine. If that is the case, then Jamie is just a violent person, and I say just is only because I don't have the full details of what got him here, then you don't need the Manospherean elements. But if you're trying to show me how does an individual come to this rage and anger and frustration, then there's a way to do that, again, with these concepts, and with the concepts that they actually use. I don't even need to imply anything different. I can use what they showed us. For example, let's say we look at the 80-20 rule. We actually make it an important plot detail. Like, it's not just there as a buzzword, but it's actually there to display a deeper analysis. And again, this deeper analysis can only come from me because I understand the concept. It can't come from the layman. But what if we were trying to point out that Fabio, the one kid that Katie wanted, she was showing herself to differentiate herself from all of the other ladies because all of the ladies wanted Fabio. And when Fabio did the nasty thing he did, which is reveal Katie's nudies, right? Jamie was slighted. How was Jamie slighted? Jamie was slighted in the sense that he actually did the entire time. If I were to edit this film, I would make it that the entire time Jamie did like Katie. The entire time. There's no action, no ambiguity there. Say that Jamie had a crush on her. And it's in that crush, it's in that desire for Katie, and seeing the discrepancy between how Katie acts with Fabio versus how Katie acts with him, we then lead into that rage and frustration. Now again, I think that the show wanted to imply that, but it didn't need to imply it. The show didn't need to sprinkle it. Explain it. Show it to us, especially in the environment of episode 3 of Jamie talking to a psychologist. That's the perfect environment to just expose or just use exposition to just explain the frustration and rage of being cast aside for the top male, right? Again, if we're going to use these elements, let's use these elements, right? Katie, who's funneling up to Fabio turns out to be a right dickhead and exposes Katie. Jamie, who is a lower bottom tier ugly male, is then disregarded and disrespected by Katie. Now again, without that soul grinding of a life, and even then 13, without showing me that background of trauma and frustration, it just becomes a leap that Jamie would kill Katie because Katie rejects him. But if Jamie liked Katie, if Jamie, let's just even go a little bit deeper. If Jamie was actually friends with Katie, and Jamie finally took this moment after an established relationship with Katie, watching Katie feed for Fabio, watching Katie be sexually open with Fabio, and when Jamie finally comes to Katie, and he tries to court Katie, and at her weakest, and her most vulnerable, and when Katie then says, never you, not no, you're disgusting. If Katie then says, you are, or she says, I'm not that desperate. That even if everyone else dislikes me, you are still lower than me. If that is what happened, and again, they highlighted this. This was a part of the plot. They showed us this. They didn't tell us. They showed us this because, again, it's a cinematic. You could have just showed the relationship Jamie had with Katie. They could have just been characters in the film. I don't understand. Anyway, if you show us this, well, then it makes more sense. The rage, the frustration, the unrequited love, the disdain, the social elements of being told you're beneath her. Think about it like this. Think about this. If you have Katie say, I'm not that desperate, the implication you have, what is communicated to Jamie, is that you are beneath even a slut. You are beneath even me, who is desperate for Fabio. No, you are lower than the worms in the dirt. Even at my lowest, I am still greater than you. That's the rage. That's the frustration. That's the disdain. And again, I think the show is trying to imply that, but again, you don't need to imply that when you have actors and writers, and you could just make the show. The show shouldn't have been a police procedural. It should have just been Jamie, Katie, Fabio, and all the other kids getting to this point And then we have the police procedural. You could even do it in reverse. We have the police procedural, then we go back in time to see and understand how we get here. The concept of being ugly, of being disregarded as a male, is definitely a frustration that young men feel. And the idea of being disregarded and disrespected by women is another thing that's incredibly important. The show wants to imply that this disdain or hatred of women, I guess, kind of comes from the manosphere, but it really doesn't. It would actually, and this is how you have to play this story, you have to play it straight. And they can't do this because they're liberal-minded. They wanted to show just boys hate women because of society. It wouldn't be the case. It would be boys would hate girls because of the way girls treat them. That's how you have to play this story out if you're going to use these Manospherian elements. And again, the idea of killing women coming from the Manosphere as well, which, to be fair, technically, Jamie was never a part of the Manosphere. He kind of really is just his own violent character, so it's like, but it's like even then, like if you're a lady and you're like, oh my goodness, the red pill manosphere is good, this pipeline is going to make men violent. You are of no concern. That you should never be, as a young lady, concerned that the manosphere will make men violent. What you should be concerned about is that the manosphere will make lots of promiscuous men that don't like you, will impregnate you, and abandon you, and will treat you with complete disregard. And really, again, that is the worst case scenario. Overwhelmingly, males in the manosphere will not come to the conclusion, even then, that they should be promiscuous males that should just smash and dash you. Although some of them, absolutely some of them, but again, that's your worst case scenario. It's not violence against women. The men that are violent against women, I'll be really honest with you, they don't need the manosphere. Because, believe it or not, most of the time, it's a little secret, so come here for a second. As it turns out, the men that are violent with women, this is just between us, usually the woman picks him and then they have a relationship together. That's typically how that occurs. It's not usually some random guy they don't know. They had a relationship, that's, but it's a secret. Shh, they don't want you to know that, like, random low-class males that have, like, no ability to engage in a sexual marketplace are not actually physical threats to women. It's the men that the women pick, but we're not ready for that conversation yet. So just keep that between us, okay? So, in conclusion, again, there's a lot to be said about adolescence, and I intend on making maybe at least one or two more videos on the topic to expand some of my ideas some more. But I do think that it is a hilarious, I don't want to call it a waste of time, but missed opportunity. Again, if you want to show us a pipeline to evil, you really need to look no further than, and I hesitate to invoke the Dark Lord's name, but you really need to look no further than Elliot Rodger. Because that is essentially the spirit of the vengeful low-class male, which even in Elliot Rodger really wasn't, but the spirit of the vengeful outcast is what a lot of these, I'm going to say liberal people, or these feminist-minded people are so deathly terrified of. And on the one hand, it kind of makes a little bit of sense to be so terrified of them because there's a complete lack of sexual attraction, and so you can kind of only see the worst elements of a male. Interestingly enough, due to the way that we live in our society currently when it comes to having sexual relationships, ironically, the most dangerous men are the sexually attractive men because those are the men that women oftentimes are the ones engaging with more often than not. But again, because they're sexually attractive, there's oftentimes just an implicit trust and an implicit value given to those males. So the only men that are really left to commentate on and discuss, unfortunately, are the low-class males where we can only see his worst attributes because there's nothing else redeeming about him because he's ugly. That's the shorthand black pill analysis as to why we keep getting these type of male characters, even though in actuality they're really not the greatest threat. And the Manosphere is not going to generate murderers by any stretch of the imagination. Again, at worst, it's going to generate men that don't like women and men that just only want to have sex with women because that's the extent of the value they can find in relationships with them. As far as hurting them, there's no need to. You know, the thing about the Manosphere is that really it's just a collection of young men trying to figure out, for the most part, how to have relationships with young women. And the reason why I make a lot of these YouTube videos, with full disclosure, is to prevent any type of individual living life like Jamie to begin with. As in, I don't want anyone to ever get to a point where they are angry enough to where they would want to attack a woman. I want them to understand the world and its truth and come with actually good solutions and coping mechanisms to deal with the existence of the world we currently live in. As such, most people in the Manosphere are exactly like me. We don't want violence by any stretch of the imagination, and so trying to use Manospherian elements to explain how a man can become violent, it's flippant, a little bit disrespectful, and it kind of misses the point into how an individual can become a murderer to begin with. It wouldn't have anything to do with the Manosphere. And I think it really sucks that people keep attributing individuals like Andrew Tate to incels when I don't even think Andrew Tate has ever even said the word incel. He probably has literally said it, but it's like it's not really even a concept he's concerned with. He's a materialistic individual, but whatever. And so because there's so many elements to discuss, and considering that this video, as long as it is, I'm going to end it here. So with that being said, I still hope you guys got something out of today's video. I doubt it. But if you did, I don't know, man, go ahead and click the like button. Shoot, go ahead and click the subscribe button. Comment, comments below, and as always, you guys have yourselves a great day. I'll see you cool cats soon.